16 million Americans enlisted in the military, which created a vacuum in the domestic workforce. Women, not permitted to serve in combat, stepped in to fill roles traditionally held by men. Women factory workers were made famous by the Rosie the Riveter poster. "We can do it," she declared, and they did. Over 6 million women signed on for manufacturing jobs, and that was just the beginning. This manufacturing boom also contributed to the growth of American cities, particularly those in Southern California and the Southern US.
Here in this modern supercharger plant, the manpower shortage is being solved by training women to do almost the entire job. Waitresses, sales girls, housewives, all have willingly taken their places in national defense.
A woman's delicate touch enabled her even to excel men in certain precision operations.
There was still this idea that if women were going to be in the paid workforce, they should be in clerical work or be typists. So to be doing physical labor, be in the defense plants, ran afoul of many ideas of what a woman should be.
Draconian enforcement methods that caused widespread suffering. The government can't suddenly just abandon that and then all of a sudden say, okay, everybody gets to, or please have 3 babies. I mean, those women who were forcibly sterilized or had IUDs forcibly inserted, some of them were subjected to forced abortions. Those women are not dead. I mean, they're not even that old, in fact. So it is part of the lived experience of all of these people. And women in particular, they're the ones who are bearing the brunt, of course, of widespread gender discrimination. They're the ones who have to have the babies. They, even if their own parents are telling them, in many cases are saying, you know, you really have to marry, you've got to have at least 1 baby. I mean, a lot of the daughters remember as well. They could see how much their own mothers maybe suffered, and they don't want to oppose that.
Those who engineered the single-child policy, the gender imbalance has been the worst unintended consequence. Because while families in the past might have just kept trying for a boy if their first child came out a daughter, the limitation has now meant only 1 chance to have that precious boy. Since the implementation of the single-child policy, the sex ratio in China, already bad, has gotten much worse. Abortions of girls abound. In order to prevent this, authorities have made it illegal for doctors to tell parents the sex of their child during ultrasound checkups. But, as we found out, for about $20 it's easy to get an illegal ultrasound check. At this clinic, a man gives us the phone number of someone who, he says, can help. And this nurse here at a hospital says they can arrange an abortion with no questions asked. It'll just cost extra.
It's a gender imbalance, the biggest in the world. Numbers worsened with high levels of female child mortality. China ended up with what was called missing females. Between 1980 and 2010, male children outnumbered female children by 36 million. Today, China has the world's most unbalanced sex ratio. For every 114 males, there are 100 females. Globally, the average sex ratio at birth is about 105 boys for every 100 girls. In China, there are 30 million more men, 30 million. These men are now having trouble finding wives, especially in rural areas. That's because men in rural areas are less educated and underemployed. So they end up as less desirable suitors. And this is interesting. Listen to this. Men in rural areas of Shaanxi, Henan and Hunan are reportedly having to offer as much as $155,000 when asking for a woman's hand in marriage. That's dowry 2.0.
As a result of sex-selective abortions during the previous one-child policy. China's gender imbalance is improving, with now around 105 males to every 100 females. But in 2020, there were still 723 million males to 688 million females. This adds up to nearly 35 million more men than women in China.
In other words, in that cohort, at least 6 million men are expected to die alone. Experts are already warning that there will be 30% more men than women by 2055.
Iceland, the Prime Minister's office selected representatives from different women's associations across the country to make preparations. The committee was politically diverse. It included teachers, single mothers, conservatives, and liberals like the Red Stockings to make sure the event reflected the views of women across Iceland. The Red Stockings took this opportunity to propose that a women's strike against the gender pay gap was the best way to mark International Women's Year. The conservative women's associations found the idea far too radical, but the Red Stockings believed in the strike, so they pushed for one and slowly got some members on board. But overall, the committee was reluctant until they heard
a woman around 70. She was from a center political party, from the old feminists. And she came to the podium and said, "Strike, is that what you don't like? Why don't you then call it just a day off?"
So that's what they did. The committee picked a day when women would collectively refuse to work at home and in the office to prove their economic value. And they called it a day off, or frænafrí.
On October 24th, 1975. They marched into the center of Reykjavik and filled the streets. 90% of women did no work that day. No schools opened, no banks opened, no kids' aid, no buses rode into town. It was impossible to get anything done on that day because when women don't work, nothing works. They changed the impression of the value of women for women and men alike forever because nothing worked in Iceland that day. So they changed the very reality that I grew up with, and they changed my view on it forever. And 5 years after this day, we were the first country to democratically elect a female president. She was a single mom. She had a 7-year-old daughter. You cannot help but to think those role models and these women who came before us and think that we owe it to the next generation to empower ourselves and the generations that follow.
I campaigned all over the country, and it was absolutely a unique experience. I never slept in a hotel. I slept in children's beds around the country, and it was arranged. You knew who in the area would vote for me, and I campaigned, and finally, I was elected.
Much of the world went into recession last year. No country melted down faster than Iceland, dragging down 3 major banks with it. The only bank to operate in the black is run by women. So, does gender make a difference in the financial world? Here's Sheila McVicker.
Iceland's collapse was the fastest in history, with 85% of the economy wiped out in weeks. There was only one financial institution, Outer Capital in Iceland, that did not lose money for its customers. Founded by 2 women on the investment principle of, if we don't understand it, we're not buying it. There's a lot of talk here about the difference it would have made if more women were on the trading floors.
It's been 99% men that wanted to take risk, wanted speed, wanted individual rewards and excessive rewards.
There's new evidence emerging that some of what happens on trading floors may be partly the result of male hormones. When testosterone levels get too high, traders become overconfident, take too much risk.
Icelandic for closed.
It disrupted much of society, everything from schools to banks to public offices.
Shops, banks and schools across the Nordic nation were shut or opened for shorter hours as female staff stayed home.
Women have built and continue to build this world. Stopping or limiting them only leads to loss and chaos. Women's rights are human rights.